Hola! What's going on, everybody? AP Edition, Hub's History Online. This is day 2 of the Cold War, trying to make this online education work. I am hoping that these videos are finding you healthy and happy and safe, but more importantly, I hope that they are informative. Yesterday, we began to look at one of the longest events in world history, the Cold War, 46 years of conflict, tension, and stress. But as you guys saw, the United States and the USSR, former friends, now enemies, were going to work to create their own images in the nations that they impact. Western Europe is not only allied with the United States as a democracy, but they are allied because of the economic ties and connections that now existed because of the Cold War. In the Soviet world, you see the Stalinesque control over Eastern Europe using governmental and military force to subdue the nations of Eastern Europe to now belong to the Soviet Union. We clearly have two separate worlds, divided. Communism versus capitalism. Communism versus democracy. Who will win as the worlds collide? One of the first places where the Cold War explodes is in Germany. Now, of course, we know our German friends, instigators of World War I, absolutely responsible for World War II. But where are they now? Decimated economically, physically, destroyed by the Nazis and what they had done to their people, only hoping to rebuild. But at the end of World War II, Germany was divided into 4 pieces. This is what it looked like. We have green belonging to the British, French, the blue, the yellow, the United States, and the red, the communist world, split into 4 so it could never do what it did again. But if you notice, there's this one little area right here. I'm going to circle it for you. That's Berlin. And Berlin could not fully belong to the Soviet Union. The Western powers wouldn't allow it. So if you notice, there is a British area, a French area, and a US area in Berlin. This here, and I'll use black as a way to color it. This here will be East Berlin. This will be West Berlin. And this little beacon right there will be the only democratic part of the Soviet world. Now, the USSR wanted to punish Germany for what it had done. So now that it took control of this area here, this eastern part, and this area here belongs to the communists, they are going to destroy everything they can. They want to hurt East Germany the same way that the German Nazi forces hurt the world. The Western powers, however, decided to unify West Germany into one democratic nation. They put their heads together and formed what became known as Western Germany. The Soviets will now control East Germany. But while the USSR destroyed German industries, the United States, the British, and the French kept with their policies of helping anyone that requested aid from the communist threat. So the US, the British, and the French began to rebuild Western technology, industries, government, education systems. Their economy began to thrive. West Germany became an economic wonder. All in thanks in part, of course, to the United States, the British, and the French. So whereas the West thrived, the East will struggle. We have a massive problem about to explode, not just in Germany, but in the capital. The United States and the USSR have already built their little allied territories, their allied nations, but one of the areas of greatest concern was Berlin. Because Berlin lied in Soviet territory, we now had an issue that was growing. How can the Soviets keep the Western nations out of West Berlin? They obviously wanted Berlin to themselves because look where it is in their territory. I mean, it's in the heart of Soviet territory. They didn't want to have any Western powers in there, but because it was the capital, it was too important for the Western powers to just lose. So they decided to stay put. Now, unfortunately, since the Soviets wanted the United States, the British, and the French out of West Berlin, they thought of a way to force the Western powers out. They put their army like this, and they surrounded West Berlin, and they gave one road that will eventually lead straight to a free territory. Now, they couldn't do it by force. They had to give them a free pass because, remember, they're trying to avoid a war here. The Soviets believed that if they cut West Berlin off from supplies, starvation, malnutrition, disease would force them to leave. This is what's going to become known as the first conflict of the Cold War. Because it wasn't an actual fight, their ideological differences forced them to compete with each other. Basically, it comes down to who can outthink their opponent. The Soviets started the game by blocking Berlin. The United States, the Western powers, combined to come up with a way to go around the Soviet blockade by flying over it. The Berlin blockade was successful for quite a while, but the Berlin airlift allowed the United States and its allies to continuously drop supplies into West Berlin for almost a year. This was the way that the U.S., the Western powers alike, avoided conflict by using a tactic that was nonviolent. They put the ball back in the Soviet Union's court, which brings us to this next image here. When you look at this image, you see our friend Joseph Stalin. This up here is represented as the Berlin airlift. Now you could see he has a gun, but what happens if he shoots? If he shoots, he risks nuclear war. Remember, at this time in history, the United States is the only nation that has nuclear power. We could have bombed Russia to the Stone Age. And I think that Stalin knew that. And he also didn't want to get involved with another major war. So rather than go to war, the Soviet Union surrendered the blockade. The Western powers win the day. This was the first victory of the Cold War, and it was a big one. The Western powers proved that they could outthink the Soviet Union, and this was pretty much what the Cold War is summed up to be. Not really a war between militaries, but a war in strategy, a war in ideological differences, how to outthink each other. This could be the greatest chess match ever played. How can the Soviet Union outperform, outthink, outmaneuver the United States? And of course, vice versa for the Western powers. Now you could see from the title of this slide that history is repeating itself. If we learned anything from one of the first days of global freshman year, there's a quote that you may have come across. Those who fail to learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. Now we know that alliances helped cause World War I. So when nations began to form alliances again in before World War II in the 1930s, people weren't stupid. They realized, like, oh my God, we're walking the same path. We're going to go to war. And we did, in fact, go to war. So what better way to prove to the world that we're not looking to go to war than by forming alliances again? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times, that's just stupid. But the world was desperate. Alliances were formed. Formed the first one in 1949, known as NATO. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, actually still exists. It has been an organization for trade and peace since its inception in 1949. But when it was first created, only a handful of nations joined. The US, Canada, Iceland, Greenland. You'll see Norway eventually joins, Spain joins later, France joins from the beginning, Britain joins from the beginning, West Germany joins from the beginning. So NATO itself has built itself over the years and now also includes all this territory too. But its first purpose was to stand against communism and, more importantly, protect each other if they were ever attacked. So NATO is just like any other alliance that was formed before World War I or World War II. It was an alliance just in case. But when you see one side forming an alliance, the other side is going to respond in kind. In 1955, the USSR formed the Warsaw Pact. But here is the difference. Anyone that joined NATO willingly joined. They were allowed to leave if they wanted to. They didn't, but they could if they wanted to. But they also opted not to join if they felt that they didn't want to. The Warsaw Pact, you were forced to join. And that's a word that I love to use when we talk about the Warsaw Pact. They were forced to join. There was not an option. There was no, can I do this later? It's, no, you do it now, comrade. You will join us or you will die. Our friend Joseph Stalin, who did not live to see the Warsaw Pact, had created this mentality in the Soviet Union that the government would send in military to crush any opposition, and it would do just that here as well. So we use the word forced just to show you the difference. NATO openly allowed members to join. Warsaw Pact forced members to join. Now, we love to look at this comparison because it shows that democracies were all about freedom and independence, whereas the communist world was about control. Which brings us to the very first nation that tries to rebel against the Soviet Union. In 1956, Hungary, which was part of the Soviet bloc, it was communist, tried to revolt against the Soviet Union. And they led a pretty successful rebellion. They tore down Stalin's statues. This is a Stalin statue. They put these chains around his neck, and they grabbed trucks, and they broke it down, and they smashed it with hammers. They melted it. They destroyed him. But then Hungary reaches out to the Western powers and said, hey, can you help us? Please help us. We can't do this alone. We need your support. Now, there are stories, of course, that we heard these messages. But because of the possible nuclear threat, because in 1953 the Soviets will detonate their first nuclear bomb, because of the possible nuclear war, we decided to not get involved. And we allowed the Hungarians to fight this rebellion on their own. Because we do not get involved, they fail. So I put the words West wouldn't help there. It's more like they couldn't help. Because if they did, World War III might have occurred. So the USSR handled their business the way they always do. They sent in the army and they destroyed the revolution. Hungary would fall under the control of the communists and would remain so until the late 1980s. Unfortunately, this is proof that we really wanted to avoid war more than help any nation. It's true that we wanted to help nations, but when the communists were already involved, it became too difficult to get involved. Now, Hungary wasn't the only country that tried to fight back. Czechoslovakia tried to in 1968. They wanted the same thing. They wanted democracy. They wanted freedom. But if you look here, Austria, right here, is democratic. Hungary tried, failed. Now they're going to try, and I'm going to spoil it. They're going to fail too. They wanted freedom. They wanted independence. But the USSR sent in their army and destroyed any possible hope for democracy. By 1970, proof was available to really show that the Soviets would use total force to keep their world under control. This is going to lead to more conflict, more ideological differences, more hatred between the Soviets and the United States. But in reality, it's going to lead to more death, more destruction than any time we've ever seen. That's it for section 2 of the Cold War. I hope you guys liked it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will catch you guys next time on Hub's History Online.